There is a moment in most people's financial lives that feels strangely delayed, almost as if progress is happening somewhere just out of sight, where the effort has been consistent, the discipline has been present, and yet the results feel disproportionately small, creating the quiet suspicion that something about the system itself is not working as expected, even though nothing appears to be technically wrong. This experience is often misunderstood as failure, lack of income, or poor strategy, but in reality it is deeply tied to a structural feature of how wealth actually forms over time, a feature that is rarely emphasized because it does not align with how people intuitively expect progress to behave. At the center of this delay is compounding, not as a buzzword or abstract idea, but as a mathematical process that unfolds unevenly, where the early stages appear almost stagnant, while the later stages accelerate in a way that feels sudden, even though the underlying inputs have remained relatively consistent. To understand this, imagine two individuals starting at the same point, each setting aside a modest amount of money regularly, not making aggressive moves, not chasing volatility, simply maintaining consistency over a long period, and for a significant stretch of time, both individuals will experience very little visible change, with their total wealth growing in a way that feels linear rather than exponential. This is where the compounding delay begins to take psychological effect, because human perception is naturally tuned to expect proportional feedback, where effort should produce visible results within a reasonable time frame. And when that expectation is not met, the tendency is to question the strategy itself rather than the time horizon required for the system to express its true behavior. The mathematical structure behind this is straightforward but often underestimated, because compounding is not just growth, it is growth on prior growth, which means that in the early phase, when the base is still small, the incremental gains are also small, creating the illusion that nothing meaningful is happening. For example, if a portfolio grows at a steady rate, the increase in the first year might feel insignificant, the second year only slightly better, and even after several years, the difference may still appear modest relative to the effort involved, reinforcing the belief that the process is slow or ineffective. However, what is often overlooked is that each period of growth is not independent, but layered on top of the previous one, and as the base increases, the same rate of growth begins to produce larger and larger absolute gains, eventually reaching a point where the change becomes noticeable, then significant, and finally difficult to ignore. This transition point is where the delay ends and the acceleration becomes visible. But by the time this happens, many individuals have already abandoned the process, not because the system failed, but because the early phase did not provide enough psychological reinforcement to sustain long-term participation. From a behavioral perspective, this creates a mismatch between how financial systems operate and how human motivation is maintained, because people are more likely to continue actions that produce immediate feedback, while compounding requires persistence through a period where feedback is minimal or delayed. This is why the compounding delay is not just a mathematical concept, but a psychological barrier, one that filters out consistency over time by making the early stages feel unproductive, even though they are structurally necessary for later growth. If we zoom out beyond individual behavior and look at this pattern systemically, we begin to see how it shapes broader economic outcomes, where individuals who are able to remain consistent through the delay phase eventually benefit from accelerated growth, while those who exit early remain in a state where progress always feels just out of reach. This creates a kind of invisible threshold, not defined by a specific income level or milestone, but by the point at which accumulated growth begins to produce noticeable changes, and crossing this threshold is less about sudden breakthroughs and more about sustained participation over time. Historically, similar patterns can be observed in wealth accumulation across generations, where the early stages of capital formation appear slow and constrained, but over longer periods, the effects of compounding create significant divergence between those who maintained continuity and those who did not. What makes this particularly challenging is that the delay phase often coincides with periods of higher financial pressure, where individuals are balancing multiple demands on limited resources, making it even more difficult to commit to a process that does not immediately reward them. In this context, the compounding delay acts almost like a test of alignment between behavior and system dynamics, where success is less about optimizing for short-term gains and more about maintaining a structure that allows growth to accumulate quietly over time. The key shift, then, is not in the numbers themselves, but in how the process is interpreted, moving away from expecting immediate transformation and toward understanding that the early phase is not a sign of stagnation, but a necessary stage where the foundation for future growth is being established. When viewed through this lens, the absence of rapid progress becomes less discouraging and more predictable, reducing the likelihood of abandoning the process prematurely and increasing the probability of reaching the point where compounding begins to express its full effect. This does not guarantee a specific outcome, nor does it eliminate the role of external factors such as income, expenses, or economic conditions, but it does clarify why the timeline of wealth formation often feels misaligned with expectations, and why the most significant changes tend to occur later rather than sooner. In the end, the compounding delay is not a flaw in the system, but a defining characteristic of it, one that quietly determines who continues and who stops, not through dramatic events, but through the subtle influence of time, perception, and consistency, shaping financial trajectories in ways that are rarely visible in the early stages, but unmistakable in the long run.